passionate eye. From KGB spy to ruler of the Kremlin, a controversial president's rise to power. In the Putin system, longtime supporters
15 years ago, our nation was strong and powerful.
and his harshest critics
There is only one key word for KGB mentality. The word is control.
give insight into the life and political motivations of Vladimir Putin, a point-of-view documentary that ultimately presents an ominous view of what Putin is willing to do to restore the old Russia of his dreams.
I think that in Putin's entourage, there are people who implement whatever they think, not always even explicit, whatever they think his policies should be or he wants the policies to be. How much of it directly comes from Putin or how much of it just fits into the whole KGB, Stalin, Putinist system, which is kind of a hybrid of all of those things.
One goal is to create great Russia and to be in power in this great Russia. This is the goal to justify all kinds of means, whether it is war in Chechnya, or it's intrigues in Ukraine, or it's manipulating by gas, or it's just putting down all opponents, or it's just control on media, or it's just special relations with Iran, whatever.
In March 2000, Vladimir Putin, an obscure ex-KGB man, is elected as president of Russia. What thoughts cross the new president's mind as he climbs these stairs to the throne of the Tsars? Is he thinking of his games on the banks of the Neva in Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg once more? Of when he was king of the gang in the communal apartment block where his family shared 2 rooms? Is he picturing the heroes of his youth like Yuri Gagarin, sensing the presence of the Tsars, whose shadows linger within these walls? Or is his mind fixed on the mission he has set himself, to save Russia, whatever the cost, from the chaos left by his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin?
Patriotic and fascinated by Tsarist imperialism in his youth, Vladimir Putin was also deeply influenced by the Soviet regime. The country that has elected him is thirsty for a new hero who will revive national strength and pride. Even the memories of Stalin's purges seem obliterated by disillusion with the present. The Russian people are nostalgic for past glory.
The first key to Vladimir Putin's future destiny is his early passion for the secret services. As a boy, he spends hours at the local cinema watching a Stalinist classic, The Heroic Deeds of a Secret Agent. Single-handed, the hero changes the destiny of a whole nation. At the age of 16, Vladimir Putin knocks on the door of the KGB headquarters in St. Petersburg and asks to join. He is told that the KGB alone decide who and when they recruit. However, they advise him to study languages and law. Vladimir Putin is 23 and in his 4th year at law school when the organization contacts him.
Mr. Putin belongs to that generation of Russians who joined the KGB in 1975 when they knew perfectly well about the crimes committed by Stalin, about the role the Soviet state security played in the dramatic history of my country.
When Putin joins the KGB, the chairman is Yuri Andropov, later to replace Leonid Brezhnev as head of state. The KGB represented the nation's elite for Andropov and helped him rule the country with an iron fist, persecuting political dissidents. But Andropov also knew that if the USSR was to survive, it needed to drastically reorganize its economy.
The Soviet leadership realized that they're in a deep structural crisis by beginning of 80s. Andropov understood that they have to prepare some changes because otherwise the country will collapse. That was done secretly. It was not announced to the public. It was done quietly. They worked out the whole policy of perestroika, which later Gorbachev inherited.
Today, Putin continues to pay homage to his mentor. Yuri Andropov unknowingly transmitted his vision of the state and his economic objectives to Vladimir Putin, influencing his own politics. The young KGB officer's first post is in St. Petersburg, where, as a minor officer, he is involved in the hunt for dissidents. 10 years later, he is posted to Dresden in East Germany. With the help of the Stasi, the East German Secret Service, his mission is to recruit informers. Inspired by Andropov, he also builds a network of business contacts, which will be very useful in later years.
Upgraded to lieutenant colonel, Putin is still in Germany at the fall of the Berlin Wall. The world around him collapses. He asks for military support. The Kremlin remains silent. Putin feels that he and his country have been betrayed. He has no other choice than to return to St. Petersburg. It is probably at this moment that his vision for the future of the country is born.
Appointed as a reserve officer at the University of St. Petersburg, Putin encounters his former law professor, Anatoly Sobchak, an ally of Boris Yeltsin, the Democrat reformer. At that time, General Oleg Kalugin is the head of the KGB in St. Petersburg, in command of 3,000 officers. When Kalugin later criticizes Putin's war in Chechnya, Putin accuses him of treason. He is forced to leave Russia.
Sobchak, the man who was one of the earlier Russian reformers, said, Oleg, I'm looking for some guy from the KGB in St. Petersburg who I could rely on. Could you offer me some name, someone? Because listen, I do not know the organization, and I know I could not be the mayor of the city without having some friends or some kind of a relationship inside.
Putin joins Sobchak's election campaign team and helps him become mayor of the city. It is a decisive moment in the KGB officer's career, his first entry into politics. The KGB needs inside informers. Putin becomes the link between the organization and Sobchak.
The idea is probably to identify people who are going to be major players, major political players in Russia within the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And to put enough KGB personnel around those people to secure that when those people will be moved to the next position, those people from KGB are going to be around. And that's how you secure that the system, in this particular case, KGB system, will stay into power. And that's exactly what's happening with Vladimir Putin.
Putin feels at home with the KGB strategy of control, discreetly observing and learning, never revealing personal ambitions. Throughout his career, this will be one of the keys to his own system. In 1991, a wind of revolt sweeps through the Soviet republics. Vladimir Putin is 39, and the USSR is in its last throes. President Gorbachev plans political reforms considered dangerous by the conservative KGB generals. They attempt a putsch. With Gorbachev's blessing, the Democrat reformer and leader of the Russian Republic, Boris Yeltsin, leads the resistance against the putschists. In St. Petersburg, Yeltsin's ally, Anatoly Sobchak, is also supported by the population, tired of 70 years of communist rule. The putschists are defeated, the generals arrested, and the KGB is in disgrace. Putin realizes that it's in his own interest to stay with the winning camp and the reformers. Like many, he resigns from the KGB, but will never forget his allegiance to the organization and its methods. During his 15 years of service, he had made the KGB system his own. At the end of 1991, Yeltsin declares the sovereignty of Russia. Gorbachev resigns. The USSR is dismantled. The Soviet republics become independent. Putin will never forget these events. Later, he declares they were the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century.
In St. Petersburg, as we know, Putin was put in charge of the foreign relations, and in that capacity he served for more a year or so. Later he was picked up by Sobchak as deputy mayor, and his job as deputy mayor was privatization, which was a very lucrative and very area, lots of shadows.
Vladimir
Putin's expertise was called upon when banks or foreign companies came to St. Petersburg. The BNP Dresdner Bank and the Crédit Lyonnais here were the first foreign banks to open branches in Russia. During the terrible winter of 1991, St. Petersburg was on the brink of famine. Most of the humanitarian aid came from Germany, and it was Putin who organized it.
Putin uses his network of business friends in Germany to create a system of barter. Creating exportation licenses, he organizes the exchange of oil for food. He has perhaps already realized the importance of energy as a tool for power.
There was a lot of dirty work going on around this so-called barter. The food was simply sold, and the money went straight into the pockets of officials and the people who'd organized the whole thing. It was an extremely critical moment in Putin's career. He considered the economy as a permanently controllable process. He wanted more and more control all the time.
Different scandals mark Putin's term of office as deputy mayor. He works with the port mafia and Spag, a German company accused of cocaine money laundering. He manages the city casinos whose profits disappear into thin air, gives the oil monopoly of the city to a friend.
But times are difficult, and Putin is not the only person to use organized crime networks. Now he is also in charge of law enforcement. He can do as he pleases. He takes his position of authority very seriously.
Если преступники обнаглели до того, что подняли руку на сотрудника милиции, сотрудники милиции должны реагировать мгновенно и жестко, а может даже жестоко. Только так мы можем подавить вот эту наглый вызов обществу, которое делает преступность. Только так. И на каждого убитого сотрудника 10 должно быть преступников положено. Ну, в рамках закона, конечно.
It was fascinating to observe Vladimir Putin's metamorphosis, to note how quickly he changed from one thing to the other. From a lieutenant colonel used to obeying orders, he transformed himself with great talent into a man fully capable of taking on enormous amounts of responsibilities.
He strategically happened to be in all the right positions, all in the right time. He strategically worked for Sobchak and in fact, doing the KGB work for Sobchak. I actually think it's a sign of brilliance, the fact that he's such a gray matter, not a sign of his mediocrity.
Well established in St. Petersburg, Deputy Mayor Putin chooses ex-KGB officers and young liberals to work at his side. In the meantime, a former member of Sobchak's team, Anatoly Chubais, a brilliant young economist, joins Yeltsin's government in Moscow. As his influence increases, he obtains key jobs for colleagues from St. Petersburg. A few years later, Putin will be the first to benefit. Chubais invents a system of privatization, which makes a clear break with the economic rules of the Soviet regime.
Before the fall of the Soviet Union, promising businessmen had been given state assets to manage. They were the first to benefit from this new system of privatization.
These new businessmen decided that now they're free, they're their own masters. And for a while, they became what we know as oligarchs.
But the oligarchs had forgotten their moral contract to manage the property for the state. They would learn to regret it. In the meantime, they became millionaires overnight. The country is in a turmoil. Ordinary Russians quickly understand that they will not be the ones to benefit from the system of privatization. As for members of the political class, their views prefer to differ.
President Yeltsin attempts to modify the constitution and impose his policy of privatization. Russian parliament and the people resist. Yeltsin sends in the tanks. More than 150 people are killed. For the Russians, it's the first step towards the end of their dream for democracy. Observing the events from St. Petersburg, Putin realizes that from now on, in Yeltsin's democracy, the rules are going to be dictated.
When Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, democracy was the most popular word. 2 years later, it became a swear word.
They call it democracy, which is shitocracy, if you translate it.
A year later, Yeltsin's tanks move in again, this time in Chechnya. The Chechens are demanding their independence, and they must be prevented from taking control over the Russian pipeline crossing their lands. After a 2-year war and 80,000 victims, Chechnya obtains a peace settlement in its favor. For the Russians, it is a humiliating defeat. For Putin, it is far worse. Yeltsin is guilty of committing a crime against the state. Chechnya is part of Russia. Chechnya should be forced to submit.
In St. Petersburg, Putin organizes Sobchak's re-election campaign as mayor. Yeltsin has portrayed his democratic obligations, and if Sobchak wins these elections, Yeltsin's old ally could become a serious contender for the presidency. At Yeltsin's request, the oligarchs refused to help Sobchak finance his campaign.
In 1996, Yeltsin organized a manhunt against him. He saw in Sobchak an opponent to be removed from the political stage.
Sobchak loses the elections, and Putin is outraged by the increasing political power of the oligarchs. Declaring his loyalty to his political benefactor, he refuses to work with the new mayor. His future and that of Russia lie in Moscow.
After being a deputy mayor of St. Petersburg and nearly getting himself to jail for his connections with organized crime, he was actually made an official in the presidential administration.
Noting Putin's hard work and loyalty towards Sobchak, Anatoly Chubais finds him a position in the Kremlin State Property Department. The 1996 presidential elections are only a few weeks off, and Yeltsin's fears are justified. He has lost the confidence of the population. The communists are back in force. Their leader, Gennady Zyuganov, is the favorite in the polls.
Without politics, you are not able to protect your capital. Those people, the first in Russia, rich people who realize they need to take political responsibility for the future of the country. Because we already felt that time that reformers, headed by Yeltsin, are not able to stop communists. And it's the reason why we met together to cooperate and to win elections.
From inside the Kremlin, Putin watches the oligarchs transform what seemed an inevitable defeat into victory. Money and television make their stage entrance into Russian politics. Yeltsin names Berezovsky head of state television and finances NTV, the private station belonging to the millionaire Vladimir Guzinsky. Yeltsin becomes a TV czar, and television the major tool for his re-election.
It was clear from the experience which they had in '96 that the next presidential campaign will demand two major tools. One is a Russian TV channel which is going to support the next president, and a company which is going financially to stay behind the electoral campaign and support the candidate financially.
The oil company Sibneft is created with Roman Abramovich, Berezovsky's intriguing young business partner, as chairman. The state TV, directed by Boris Berezovsky, becomes a tool for state propaganda. A system is born to promote Yeltsin's successor. The elections are hardly over when Yeltsin falls ill again. He delegates his powers to the oligarchs Berezovsky and Abramovich, who have won their gamble in using their money to obtain political power. They literally command the country, with other members of a group known as the family. It includes Yeltsin's own daughter, Tatiana, and her future husband. The oligarchs are looking for someone young, serious, but unpretentious, who will suit Yeltsin as his successor. Obedient and efficient, Vladimir Putin seems the perfect choice.
In 1998, the family proposed Putin as head of the FSB, the former KGB. It is a decisive and symbolical step in his career, a chance to prove his loyalty and render important services to the regime.
Повторяю, для меня это родные стены, но это и огромное доверие со стороны президента страны, со стороны правительства.
Although a former KGB lieutenant colonel, Vladimir Putin is the first civilian in history to be nominated to this post. He now finally occupies the seat that his mentor Yuri Andropov had left 16 years earlier.
These oligarchs were hoping that Putin, who was promoted only to the rank of lieutenant colonel, which is not really very high, is not going to be loyal to FSB the way a general of FSB is going to be loyal.
But what the oligarchs fail to realize is that Vladimir Putin has never abandoned the KGB spirit and its ideology. He feels invested with a mission, and in the shadows, he patiently awaits his hour.
Protected by their political status, the oligarchs triple their fortunes, dilapidate millions, and invest massively offshore. In the meantime, many Russians are finding it hard to subsist. In summer 1998, the economic crash is inevitable. Yeltsin needs a firm hand at the helm to reassure the population. A KGB prime minister appears his best option. The first one, Soviet-style Evgeny Primakov, takes his mission too seriously and declares that he will put a halt to corruption and throw the oligarchs in jail. The population jubilates. Yeltsin and the family feel distinctly worried. Confident in the people's support, Primakov turns a blind eye. He nominates a new general prosecutor, Yuri Skuratov, to assist him. Skuratov's first inquiry starts within the walls of the Kremlin itself and concerns its sumptuous renovation. $66 million have been embezzled and are to be found on the bank accounts of high-ranking civil servants and members of the family. The general prosecutor is treading dangerous ground.
A criminal inquiry was opened. Technically, it was simple enough. The problem was Yeltsin himself was directly involved.
And Yeltsin could not throw the prosecutor out because he had no legitimate legal power. So he asked Mr. Putin, could you do anything? And he said, yeah, well, no problem, we'll do it. So, you know, the prosecutor was framed at the KGB safe house with some of the prostitutes, and it was all on camera and shown on Russian television.
The director of the FSB, Vladimir Putin, has announced that the pictures of the man resembling Yuri Skuratov are authentic. They've been confirmed as being those of the general prosecutor.
Skuratov is forced to resign.
Putin, in the eyes of Yeltsin, became someone who would never let him down. And in that sense, he is probably right. Putin keeps his word. I mean, in that sense, he knows his superiors, and he never betrayed them so far. And that's a fact. That's part of his character.
For Yeltsin, Mr. Putin, the head of the FSB, has passed his test. He deserves a reward.
Я решил назвать человека, который, по моему мнению, способен консолидировать общество. Владимир Владимирович Putin.
Putin's nomination as Prime Minister in August 1999 confirms that he has been approved of by the whole family, but he's still unknown to the population. That he has been approved of by the whole family, but he's still unknown to the population.
No one knew him. Everyone was asking, who is this Putin man? Do you remember that question? Who is Mr. Putin? So he had to show who he was. And that's when we had the explosions in the Moscow apartment blocks.
In 3 weeks, explosions in several Russian towns killed 300 people. The government immediately accuses the Chechen rebels. But when another explosion is nipped in the bud and 2 terrorists are arrested, the Kremlin surprisingly orders the police to stop inquiries. Journalists discover what could well become a state affair. The terrorists in question are in fact members of the FSB. NTV, the TV station belonging to Vladimir Gusinsky, broadcasts a debate on the implication of the FSB in the explosions, where FSB officials accuse one another of collusion. The public still finds this hard to believe. But journalists are pursuing their investigations, and as Prime Minister, Putin realizes that there is no time to be lost. He must create a diversion. He decides to exploit the population's hatred for the Chechens.
You see, Chechnya has always been the politician's grave. A lot of people were afraid and thought Putin should keep his distance. But he was determined. To general surprise, it played in his favor.
Трудно назвать этих людей людьми. Их даже зверями назвать нельзя. Если это звери, то бешеные.
The middle class became angry. Putin reacted in the same way. This is when he started to build his image, saying, I'm a man like you. I'm the head of state, but I'm the same as you.
Мы будем преследовать террористов везде. В аэропорту. Значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, мы и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт окончательно.
It's at this moment that Putin really becomes Putin. He acquires his own language, freedom of expression, and complicity with the Russian people. He's no longer afraid of his public.
For the last 3 centuries, many Russians and their leaders have resented the Chechen bandits, as they call them. The Chechens have always refused to submit to Russian dominance. Stalin deported them by thousands. Yeltsin's peace treaty is felt as a humiliation, and for the population, the recent explosions are a provocation. Their Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin, is entirely justified in declaring a new war. Berezovsky asks Sergei Doryenko, the star journalist of his TV station, to put his political news magazine at the service of Vladimir Putin.
He often asked me in private to provoke a situation. For example, when I suggested that our army attacked Chechnya, he said, "Say it on the air." I said, "I was going to anyway. You say it." He answered, "No, I want you to say it for me. We'll see how people react."
On the 1st of October, Russian bombers attacked Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. With Berezovsky's state TV and the population behind him, Putin throws Russia into a ferocious war. The Chechen people are the victims of unprecedented barbarity.
Putin showed that he was capable of making a firm political stand and of taking difficult political decisions. He showed that he was the ideal military leader for the country.
Satisfied with his conduct, the family decide to create a political party for Putin in the next parliamentary elections. There are 2 months to go. Made to measure by Boris Berezovsky, Unity, later to become United Russia, has a single item on its agenda: the promotion of Vladimir Putin. If his party wins, he will be confirmed as a legitimate successor to Boris Yeltsin. The state TV and Abramovich and his oil company Sibneft provide media and financial support.
This time, Guzinski and his station NTV, who are against the war in Chechnya, support Putin's main rival, the former Prime Minister, Evgeny Primakov. Berezovsky sinks to the lowest tricks to discredit the enemy.
For sure, we used election technology, which are very specific in Russia. We use power of mass media, not in a soft way like you use it on the West, in very strong and very hard way.
Mission accomplished for Berezovsky. Unity's score confirms Putin's political dominance. Everyone gets ready for the New Year's Eve festivities, unaware that behind the Kremlin walls, Yeltsin and his Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin, are preparing the final act to the strategy of these last months. On the 31st of December, Yeltsin summons Putin to his office, gives him the nuclear attaché case, and names him president by interim until the presidential elections. For his part of the deal, Putin offers Yeltsin and his family total immunity and a large pension for life. A way for Yeltsin to avoid destitution and legal pursuit for his crimes against the state.
What Yeltsin probably didn't realize is that Putin is loyal to his mission and not towards the men he has served. For him, Yeltsin is guilty of dismantling the Soviet Union, of losing the first war in Chechnya, and of leading Russia towards auto-destruction. It was essential to remove him from power, once and for all.
Последний раз обращаюсь к вам как президент России. Я ухожу.
On New Year's Eve, crowds pressed to the Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow to catch a glimpse of Yeltsin's chosen successor. In vain. The presidential box remains empty. Putin has lost no time in publicly showing his priorities. He and his wife have left the city the same evening to join the troops on the Chechen front. In front of the television cameras, he offers the soldiers 200 daggers, especially engraved for the occasion. A symbolic present for the men who are fighting the Chechen guerrilla.
Symbolically also, Putin has laid the first brick in his presidential election campaign. His image makers now have to make him a charismatic figure that will charm the Russian electorate.
What we advised him to do was to show he was in good health compared with Yeltsin. We advised him to show he could pilot a fighter plane or go down in a submarine.
Putin is a quick learner. He learns how to appear in public. He's a good sport and appears to be a perfect gentleman. He even shows that he can smile. Radio programs receive thousands of love letters from women infatuated with the new Russian hero.
While Putin takes part in village fetes, the violence of the Chechen War, an important element in his campaign, intensifies. The massacre in Chechnya doesn't stop the Orthodox Church from supporting Putin. In spite of Soviet repression, the population is still strongly religious. Putin, the man of modest origins, makes it known to the people that he still wears the tin cross given to him by his mother at his christening.
Now he is very religious, and he speaks, confessing to the Patriarch himself, to the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. The Patriarch has been for 40 years agent of the KGB. And who is the case officer of the Patriarch? General Patrushev, head of the KGB. So the Patriarch tells Mr. Patrushev about everything. And Mr. Patrushev is visiting the next day the president and telling him everything. It is like a joke.
He started to appeal to all people around him. He started to appeal to reformers, to liberals, to Democrats, to nationalists, to statists, to Russians and Muslims. And a lot of people considered him as their own guy. He's just a guy from our street.
Only the head of the Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, remains a serious contender for Putin. Other candidates hardly dare criticize him. He seems to represent everything the population could desire. To further convince electors, Putin presents his manifesto, entitled Russia on the Brink of the Third Millennium. He promises to make the country autonomous and respected in the world. Not only the Russian electorate, but also the West discover Russia's new face, or so they think.
Putin's manifesto, with which he introduced himself to the Russian electorate as a presidential candidate, rather than just, the hero of the Chechen crackdown, was a stunning document. It was broadly liberal. It had a vision of a Russian institutional evolution that made it quite possible to think of Putin as a westernizer.
Western politicians are mistaken. Putin's political vision is different from anything in the West. He indeed promises to reform justice and the institutions, but he also talks of a managed democracy and the vertical of power. He combines without any hesitation contradictory values such as liberalism and statism, democracy and dictatorship. Both in Russia and abroad, people only see the mark of someone capable of putting an end to political and economic chaos.
These elections are all but a remake of the 1996 poll. But if Zyuganov had his chances against the ailing Yeltsin, this time he has lost before he starts. Putin graciously uses him as a sparring partner to guarantee his own victory.
What is the choice? Either it will be a communist leader, Zyuganov, or it will be a KGB colonel. I mean, is that the choice? Is that a real election?
On March the 26th, 2000, Vladimir Putin is elected outright in the first ballot with a 52% majority as President of the Federation of Russia.
Клянусь уважать и охранять права и свободы человека и гражданина. Соблюдать и защищать Конституцию Российской Федерации. защищать суверенитет. И независимость.
Beyond these ceremonious words, Vladimir Putin, the man from the KGB, has not forgotten the teenage dream and his mission to restore the nation to its former power. His goals are to develop the strategic resources for the state: oil, gas, the media, other industries, to restore military power and revive the sense of national pride and identity. Putin himself owed much of his success to television. It was the first tool he needed to possess. The oligarchs who owned the media had monopolized political power and vandalized the state. They had taken him for a puppet. Now the tables have turned. Yeltsin has been evinced. It is their turn to pay for their crimes.
The new president uses tactics for his first move. He decides to operate through the state-owned energy giant Gazprom, which has important assets in the media.
So it's not a wonder that Mr. Putin, who came into power in 2000, obviously took this opportunity and, to me, literally directly headed Gazprom himself, appointing his representative, Mr. Miller, as a formal CEO of this company. Mr. Putin literally makes decisions on important business transactions or important investment projects by himself. This means that he's in fact the CEO of Gazprom.
In the Kremlin, Putin calls on former colleagues and ex-KGB officers in St. Petersburg to join his team. Alexei Miller is one of them. Gazprom is the perfect tool to attack Vladimir Gusinsky, owner of the private TV station NTV, financed by loans from the energy giant.
So all Putin actually did is demanded for his loan to be returned to Gazprom. And at that moment, financially and economically, Gusinsky was ruined, of course. And it was clear to everybody this move is political.
The rebel oligarch is incarcerated in June 2000 for embezzlement. The court allows him to leave the country provided he turns over the majority of his NTV stocks to Gazprom. Under the cover of the law and the fight against corruption, Putin has started to hunt down the enemy within and a campaign against the independent media. Boris Berezovsky, the oligarch who had helped Putin to become president, also begins to realize that the wind has changed. Gusinsky has fled. Berezovsky is the only oligarch who is not invited to the first meeting organized by Putin. For the remaining oligarchs, Putin announces it's business as usual, but politics are out. Putin is beginning to show what stuff he's made of. Berezovsky has considered him to be a mere pawn to serve his own interests. And for Putin, humiliation is a powerful incentive for cold and calculated revenge. Berezovsky's fate is strangely linked to an event that jeopardizes Vladimir Putin's own political career. In August 2000, 3 months after his investiture, the annual Navy exercises are to show the whole world that Russian military power is not to be underrated. But two mysterious explosions send the pride of the fleet, the nuclear submarine Kursk, to the floor of the Barents Sea. Putin refuses assistance from abroad and remains silent for several days. The 118 submariners on board perish in the depths. The Russian people are angry. The press accuses Putin of contempt for the families. Berezovsky, who still imagines he's the master of the situation, jumps at the opportunity to publicly denounce the president's incompetence.
After the Kursk case, Putin definitely decides to take TV channel from Berezovsky, and that's when the open conflict between Berezovsky and Putin started.
Like his colleague, Gusinsky, Berezovsky is accused of embezzlement and flees the country to avoid jail.
Berezovsky wanted to be the boss. Only because of Berezovsky's immense ambitions, he was out. He had to be out. Another oligarch who was out, Mr. Gusinsky, he also wanted to be the boss and rule Russia through the television. They misunderstood that there only and always is only one boss in the Kremlin.
Putin's idea of democracy does not allow for criticism of authority. 1 year after his arrival in power, Gazprom finalizes the takeover of NTV. Early one morning, armed men invade the television studios. When they arrive, the journalists discover that a team from the Kremlin has replaced them. Putin gives one warning, but if unheeded, he is pitiless. Kiselyov and others find themselves jobs on one small station still belonging to Berezovsky. A few months later, it is also taken over and replaced by a sports channel.
There is only one key word for KGB mentality. The word is control. What you control is safe. What you don't control is a threat. So it means that you should try control as many things as possible.
A few days after the election as president, he went to the Dzerzhinsky Club. It is a big theater. There were 800 officers. And Mr. Putin went to the front of the stage.
Группа сотрудников ФСБ, направленные вами в командировку для работы под прикрытием правительства, на первом этапе со своими задачами справляется.
Mr. Putin realized it is his card to use, the KGB as man of the KGB. Such a huge support. Remember I told you, I'm your man.
During the Cold War, the hunt for Western spies was one of the principal activities of the KGB. Putin immediately shows the West, and in particular the United States, that the secret services, now called the FSB, are back. Edmund Pope, a former intelligence officer of the US Navy, is arrested and tried for spying.
They had to make an example, and boom, here comes this time, so they grab me and use me as an example. Several of the FSB officers at the prison point blank told me the reason I was there was strictly a political event. They wanted to make a very, very clear break from the Yeltsin administration.
Our country, like any police state, needs two enemies. An enemy within and an enemy without. If there are no enemies, the system cannot survive. It's just like the Soviet Union.
Stalin's national anthem returns, with the words rewritten by the same author, and many older Russians are comforted to see the red flag of their youth flutter in military parades again.
There's a marked return of symbols like the former national anthem. Putin wants to revive the ideology that we're a great country, a great nation, respected throughout the world, feared even, that we're of vital importance. This ideology is combined with former totalitarian stereotypes which are firmly rooted in the heads of many people in this country. I'm just a simple man, but the government and the state are great and mighty.
It is easy to rekindle the nostalgia of the older generation, but the young have no memories. Putin's political advisors create a youth movement called Nashi. 1 year after his election, 10,000 young people gather on the Red Square to celebrate the anniversary. In 2002, they are 20,000. In 2004, 50,000. And in 2007, 100,000.
15 years ago, our nation was strong and powerful. If we're not careful, our people may disappear from the face of the earth.
Nashi, an army for Putin, funded by Gazprom.
(9/11, 2001). Putin is the first head of state to contact George W. Bush. This gesture brings him into the international limelight.
Россия не понаслышке знает, что такое террор. И поэтому мы лучше всего понимаем чувства американского народа. Обращаясь от имени России к народу Соединенных Штатов, хочу сказать, что мы с вами.
Obviously, he was sympathetic, and I assume sincerely so. But it is also in the interest of the Kremlin and of Putin to ally himself with the United States and to make whoever is the opponent of Russia be viewed as a terrorist by the Americans.
Of course, this friendship gave the time for the Putinist Russia to build a new military weaponry and new force, again threatening, as they announce, threatening the world, to get eyes kept off Russian atrocities, even to the level of genocide in Chechnya, because Russia is needed for something other.
Since 9/11, the Cold War has become past history. Russia and the USA are on their honeymoon. George Bush has been invited to Moscow to sign a treaty on the reduction of their nuclear arsenals that neither country has any intention of respecting. The real reason for their meeting is quite different. The two presidents signed no less than 67 agreements on oil and gas. Shortly afterwards, Vladimir Putin declares, whoever controls the production, the distribution, and the price of oil controls power in today's world. With emotion, George W. Bush declares, when I looked deep into the eyes of Vladimir Putin, I could see a fellow soul.
Looking at the icy eyes of KGB agent and being moved by deepness of the soul, that is worrying. The West will awake, but the West is losing the time. The losses in time may be turned into losses in independence.
Energy is at the center of the political operations of Russia, and also internally, and also it's critical to Russia's presence on the world stage.
If you use that as opposed to ideology as the foundation for your increased position in the world, Russia is going to return to a significantly prominent position in the global affairs.
American multinationals see Putin's expansionism with a grim eye. They construct two pipelines bypassing Russia, from Baku in Azerbaijan to Ceyhan. The honeymoon between the USA and Russia is over. The first shots have been fired in the new energy war.
And pipelines are different than just general commercial agreements. Pipelines hardwire relationships. They represent an enormous investment of billions of dollars, and they create a link between countries that's really very different than almost any other kind of commercial arrangement.
The Yukos oil tycoon, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, understood this link long before Putin's arrival on the scene. At the fall of the Soviet Union, he and other oligarchs had associated themselves with Western companies, exploiting Russian oil fields to make personal fortunes. Khodorkovsky plans to clinch further deals with the US. He has also ignored Putin's warning to keep out of politics. Putin's reaction is as to be expected. Like Gusinski and Berezovsky before him, Khodorkovsky is arrested for tax evasion. He's sentenced to 8 years in Siberia. His companies are taken over by Gazprom with support from Western banks invited to open branches in St. Petersburg when a certain Vladimir Putin was deputy mayor. Through the Yukos-Khodorkovsky affair, Putin makes it clear to the West that his new weapon is energy, and nothing will stop him from using it to rebuild Russia's greatness.
It was some kind of demonstration that power is the strongest institute in Russia. The president in Russia, the vertical of power in Russia, it is institute of something like Byzantine system, Tsar. Tsar decided and Tsar did it.
When Putin next summons the oligarchs, no one evokes the subject which is uppermost in their minds, the fate of Khodorkovsky. If anyone dares contradict the president, they know they are out for good. To elaborate his system of control, Putin creates his own oligarchy. State officials and members of his clan, they are all former KGB officers or St. Petersburg liberals.
Putin runs corporation. For him, Russia is a corporation, it's a business. They're nationalizing all the expenses and they're privatizing the profits. Gazprom is one of the best examples. The moment the gas enters the pipeline, it's a state monopoly. The moment the gas is sold, it's a private company. You want to find the cleanest oligarch system in the history of human race. The Putin created this one. That's a time when there's no difference, no frontier, no visible frontier between business and the government. Money rules the country and the government controls the money.
So it's a different approach, but the substance is the same. The substance is that the law is not for us, that we are operating justice, that we are operating everything, that we can just do whatever we want. But he also brought ideology to that, saying that this is a way at the moment to create great Russia.
Mr. Sechin, Mr. Patrushev, Mr. Viktor Ivanov, Mr. Medvedev, Mr. Surkov, Mr. Sobyanin, well, I'm not sure the world knows about that, but of course Russians do know. They do know that Putin's lieutenants, unfortunately, these people who rule Russia on behalf of the presidency, they don't have one very important thing. They don't have accountability for what is happening.
That is vertical. I mean, that you cannot be more vertical than that. And so, you know, he did what he promised, and that's what's sort of remarkable about him. When he promised, it sounded like it's going to be beneficial to Russia. But somehow, when we turn around, all of a sudden, instead of benefiting us, benefited his idea of.
Vladimir Putin is candidate for a second presidential mandate in 2004.
Opposition in Russia is not fighting for winning elections. Opposition in Russia is fighting for having elections. Any election held from 1993 to nowadays was marked by growing government interference. And today, of course, it's not an election, it's a more of a Soviet-type vote when the results is already being fixed before the election results are announced.
In March 2004, Putin wins the elections with an outright majority of 71%. He has 4 more years to consolidate his policies. He presides over what has become a single-party system. His party, renamed Russia United, receives its orders from the Kremlin. Opposition parties have no power. Political debate has ceased to exist. To regain control is also Putin's objective for the former republics of the Soviet Union. They are more and more openly coveted by the United States, who are eager to create a barrier to Russian expansionism. Ukraine, symbolically and strategically the most important of these countries, is at the crossroads for the transit of Russian oil and gas to Europe.
With the advent of Putin, a geopolitical project was created called the Single Economic Space, in which Russia had the main role. This project was entirely anti-Western and an attempt to weaken the influence of Europe and the USA in the countries of the former Soviet Union.
The Ukrainian presidential elections are in October 2004. The pro-Russian authoritarian regime is in difficulty, but Putin has no intention of letting Ukraine choose the path to democracy. The FSB and Putin's advisors collaborate closely with Ukrainian intelligence services to ensure the victory of Putin's protege, Viktor Yanukovych. At the climax of the election campaign, Viktor Yushchenko, the pro-Western candidate, is poisoned and badly disfigured. But this doesn't deter him or the Ukrainian people. On the 20th of December, after an agitated poll, the Orange Revolution leads him to victory.
This was an anti-Russian revolution, an anti-imperialist revolution against the Kremlin Empire. It was the most terrible failure of his whole political career.
For Putin, it is more than a failure. It's a humiliation. But there are other ways to show Ukraine that she will not escape from Russia's hold.
After the Orange Revolution, the energy policy towards Ukraine became more and more brutal. Gas and oil were used as levers.
On the 1st of January 2006, the Kremlin cuts off the gas supplies to Ukraine.
This action was from the beginning intended to show the Ukraine and Europe how powerful Russia is in terms of its influence with regard to gas supplies.
But the Kremlin's blackmail has only just begun. Parliamentary elections are coming up, and Russia continues its intimidation by stopping the importation of Ukrainian goods. Putin's message is clear. The pro-Russian Yanukovych must become prime minister. If the Ukrainians vote for his party, everything will return to normal. Today, the deed is done. Yanukovych is prime minister, and Ukraine is moving away from Europe and NATO. In Ukraine, Putin demonstrates his capacity to use any means to transform a failure into victory.
I think that today Putin feels completely at ease. He simply has a feeling of superiority. In my opinion, this feeling is totally justified.
Putin is right to be confident. He's the king of the largest gas field in the world. In 2005, Putin signs an agreement with Chancellor Gerhard Schröder for a pipeline under the Baltic Sea linking Russia to Western Europe, making it more dependent on Russian gas. But he doesn't stop there. The same year, he signs a treaty with another friend, Silvio Berlusconi, and the Turkish Prime Minister for the construction of the Blue Stream pipelines serving Central and Southern Europe. Gazprom's giant tentacles will not only engulf all European countries, but also Japan, China, and South America. Putin's objectives? A transnational government around Gazprom. Russia's future challenge to American world dominance. But Gazprom is also oil, uranium, banks, the media, football teams, and its future business temple, an architectural feat in St. Petersburg. Putin is at the summit of one of the most powerful empires in the world.
The leaders of countries like France, Germany, the USA, England, Japan, Canada, Italy say to him, my dear friend, you know what's going on in Chechnya. Your leaders know what's happening there. But they say, it doesn't matter, doesn't matter. We need the gas and the oil. That says it all.
Gerd und Vladi, Politik zum Schmusen schön.
The Russian government is explaining that he's fighting
Putin is so sure of his hold over European countries that when, during a summit, a French journalist criticizes the war in Chechnya, he hits back below the belt.
Killing hundreds of people. Given this, don't you think that by trying to eradicate terrorism in Chechnya, you are going to eradicate the civilian population of Chechnya?
Если вы хотите совсем уж стать исламским радикалом и готовы пойти на то, чтобы сделать себе обрезание, то я вас приглашаю в Москву. У нас многоконфессиональная страна, у нас есть специалисты по этому вопросу. И я порекомендую ему сделать эту операцию таким образом, чтобы у вас уже больше ничего не выросло.
A new tragedy reminds the Russians of the situation in Chechnya. Hostages taken by terrorists are held in a school in Beslan in the northern Caucasus. Russian special forces storm the school. 186 children can be counted among the 344 civilian victims. The Kursk catastrophe in 2000, the hostage-taking in a Moscow theater in 2002, and now Beslan. This is the third major crisis for Vladimir Putin in 4 years. Signs that his governance has serious flaws. Things have to change. On the 31st of January 2005, Putin declares that the war between Russia and Chechnya is over. Russia will no longer be responsible for the atrocities committed in Chechnya. Putin has transformed the conflict into a civil war by nominating Ramzan Kadyrov, the son of the recently assassinated pro-Russian president, as prime minister. Kadyrov's ferocious militia replaces the regiments of the Russian army.
Of course, today, they're the only ones Putin can count on. The war in Chechnya has been raging for 10 years. And now it's Ramzan Kadyrov and his criminal murderers who are implementing Putin's policies and his war in Chechnya. Part of the Chechen population kills and eliminates the other, while the Russians turn a blind eye. Half the population terrorizes the rest of the population. The majority of the Chechen people lives in fear and a feeling of total injustice.
The Kremlin offers a reward of $100,000 for the assassination of the rebel leaders. In 2005, the first, Aslan Maskhadov, former elected president and protagonist for peace, is killed by the Russian special services. In 2006, it is the turn of Shamil Basayev, the fundamentalist leader. The wars in Chechnya have decimated 200,000 inhabitants, 20% of the population. But more insidiously, Putin has destroyed the self-respect and identity of the whole nation. As for Gazprom, a new pipeline will soon be crossing Chechen territory, linking Baku to Central Europe.
After Beslan, he was speaking and he said, we've been working very hard to salvage the remnants of the Soviet Union any way we possibly can. And I was shocked. I mean, I didn't know that that's what we were working on. In fact, I thought we were working on overcoming those remnants, but apparently not. And that's, that quote says it all in a way. It's that his mission is to salvage the remnants of the Soviet Union any way we can. And that becomes personal.
Any semblance of democracy has vanished. Putin installs an openly authoritarian regime. He personally nominates the regional governors and magistrates, passes a decree reducing the freedom of journalists. Another refusing visas to foreigners lacking in respect. The FSB creates groups of civilian informers, and to avoid a replica of the Ukrainian uprising, Putin reduces the possibility for foreign funding of NGOs.
Putin knows that when you want to gag the enemy within, you must also gag the enemy without. The Americans break their silence.
No legitimate interest is served when oil and gas become tools of intimidation or blackmail, either by supply manipulation or attempts to monopolize transportation. And no one can justify actions that undermine the territorial integrity of a neighbor or interfere with democratic movements. Yet in Russia today, in many areas of civil society, from religion and the news media to advocacy groups and political parties, the government has unfairly and improperly restricted the rights of her people.
Unlike the Europeans, the Americans take Putin's nationalist and authoritarian offensive very seriously. Their world dominance could be put to question. They announced their plan to install anti-missile batteries in Eastern Europe. Putin retaliates.
Их военный бюджет в абсолютных величинах почти в 25 раз больше, чем у России. Вот это и называется в оборонной сфере их дом, их крепость. И молодцы, молодцы. Но это значит, что и мы с вами должны строить свой дом, свой собственный дом, крепким, надежным. Потому что мы же видим, что в мире происходит. Но мы же это видим. Как говорится, товарищ Волк знает, кого кушать. Кушает и никого не слушает. И слушать, судя по всему, не собирается.
Energy is considered to be Russia's new strategic weapon, but its nuclear arsenal has 8,000 more nuclear warheads than the USA. Russia is the second biggest arms exporter in the world, supplying no less than 61 countries. Between energy dependence and arms sales, Russia possesses the two most powerful geostrategic instruments in the world.
The legacy of the Cold War is that Russia and the United States are still the two largest military powers in the world, particularly with regard to nuclear weapons. And since Russia has them in the thousands that can reach the United States, in terms of how U.S. weapons are targeted, Russia is still by far the primary target. Putin's willingness to sell military and nuclear technology to China, to Iran, to Venezuela, to other countries that the United States is at least suspicious of, if not actively hostile. But there could come a point where it goes beyond that, you know, where Putin tries to restore the kind of superpower proxy battles that happened during the Cold War.
И более того, мы развиваем свой ядерный комплекс сдерживания. Как вы знаете, недавно провели испытания новых систем баллистического оружия. В позапрошлом году успешно проведены испытания таких боевых комплексов, которых пока нет, и вряд ли раньше нас появятся на вооружении других стран мира.
We could see the world in 5 or 10 years when the Middle East is dominated by Iran, with Russia in background. When Americans are pushed out, humiliated, and kicked.
Russians today love Putin. If you look at approval ratings, I mean, he has 65% approval rating, with a huge approval rating. He may look as if he's attending to people's businesses because that's what we see on TV, and, you know, very much like Stalin, in fact. We saw Stalin attending to the public and you know, being an expert in everything from, you know, studying of languages to national politics to athletes, whatever. Putin is kind of the same thing. And while in Stalin's case, maybe he needed some sort of arm twisting for people to believe that he was the greatest, in Putin's case, somehow it all happens voluntarily.
This popularity is illusion. If you switch on Russian news every night, you will see Putin only with good news, never bad news. It's a joke that if Putin on TV screen, it's a good news. If somebody else, it may be bad news, but never Putin, only good news. He increasing pensions, he increasing salaries, he fighting oligarchs, he speaking with Bush, Schroeder and Merkel. Brezhnev was superstar, Stalin was superstar. In every authoritarian regime, there is only one superstar.
I know certain young people in business who are not interested in the past or in politics. Everything suits them in general. They're very numerous. These people belong to the system. They belong to the Putin system. They're ready to close their eyes to the lack of freedom. It doesn't seem necessary to them.
In Moscow today, consumerism is the new religion. The heart of the Russian capital throbs to the inflow of gas and petrodollars. The more you pay, the better. Moscow has overtaken the West at an incredible speed. No other capital in the world counts so many millionaires. Luxury stores, giant advertisements, top-priced cars, casinos. A new middle class has emerged in Moscow, doping retail sales. The richest buy yachts, private jets, works of art, skiing resorts. In London, where the most expensive properties are the new dachas of the Muscovites, some business tycoons even invest in famous football clubs. While near Moscow, the trendiest create country clubs, Russian style.
Putin's regime is very good in creating illusions that reflect the general belief that Russia's economy is growing, it's all blossoming, and of course, in the center of Moscow, you will get these feelings. If you start traveling 50 miles outside of center of Moscow, it's like taking a ride in a time machine. So in St. Petersburg, you don't have to go that far. It's about 100 meters from Nevsky Prospect, one way or another, and you are immediately entering the Dostoevsky St. Petersburg of the night.
Clubs, Russian style.
Putin's regime is very good in creating illusions that reflect the general belief that Russia's economy is growing, it's all blossoming, and of course, in the center of Moscow, you will get these feelings. If you start traveling 50 miles outside of center of Moscow, it's like taking a ride in a time machine. So in St. Petersburg, you don't have to go that far. It's about 100 meters from Nevsky Prospect, one way or another, and you are immediately entering the Dostoevsky St. Petersburg of the 19th century.
Of the Soviet regime, like the intellectuals and the former dissidents that support the Sakharov Foundation, are the targets of Putin's regime, as in the days of Yuri Andropov. These men and women contested the injustice, the repression, and the very essence of the Soviet system, and often paid for it in the Gulag.
Nobody in my generation thought that one day we would see the end of the Soviet system, the fall of communism. When it finally happened, we thought it would never return. But it has.
The presidential elections of 2008 are approaching. The pervading atmosphere created by the regime incites acts of violence towards its opponents. Disillusioned, one of Putin's former advisors, Marat Gelman, has created an alternative movement where art is the means of expression. His gallery is ransacked.
I was afraid they'd decide to finish me off, so I started to shout. One of them told me to shut up, and I shouted even louder. The other one threw the computer at me, and then they left.
Not all young people have been won over by Putin, like the members of Nashi or the Young Guards, a political movement. 20 teenage activists occupy a citizens' complaints bureau in the presidential administration, demanding Putin's resignation. Seven are sentenced to 5 years in jail.
On the 23rd of September 2006, Putin receives the Légion d'honneur from President Jacques Chirac. Strangely, only Russian television is permitted to film the event.
Why do world leaders queue up to shake this man Putin's hand? Does he deserve people to shake his hand? Nobody seems to ask themselves that question.
Anna Politkovskaya is the 22nd journalist assassinated since Putin's arrival in power. She was about to publish an investigation on the torture carried out in Chechnya by Ramzan Kadyrov's armed gangs. She is killed in the entrance to her apartment block on October the 7th, 2006, Vladimir Putin's birthday. A sinister present, commissioned perhaps by Kadyrov himself. 5 months later, in March 2007, Putin appoints Kadyrov as president of the Republic of Chechnya.
Alexander Litvinenko, former officer of the FSB, was also a defender of the Chechen cause. He emigrated to London after denouncing the implication of the FSB in the Moscow bomb explosions imputed to the Chechens in 1999.
After her book was published, her book Putin's Russia, she had quite a number of threats which became more frequent directly from the Kremlin. And during our last one of our last meetings, she asked me directly, can they kill me? Do you think they can kill me?
Alexander Litvinenko will never reveal the conclusions to his investigation on Anna Politkovskaya's murder. Poisoned by a highly radioactive substance, he dies 1 month later. A list of 100 people to be eliminated was put into circulation on the internet. Several people interviewed in this film are on the list. They have nevertheless accepted to voice their opinions.
I think, of course, that the choice of the moment for the assassination of Litvinenko, like that of Politkovskaya, were extremely linked with the presidential campaign of 2008.
Who do these crimes benefit? Several theories exist, but the absence of justice in Russia makes it improbable that those behind the murders ever be brought to justice. If the constitution is not modified, Putin cannot be a candidate for a third term of office in 2008. But he can again in 2012. Or maybe before. Who knows?
Putin has been smart enough to organize a new configuration of power, creating several clans or groups. apparently understanding that if he has only one group to rely upon, he'll be done with. He'll lose his independence. And he can only survive, he can only survive by being moderator, the upper judge, and presiding over the bickering of the dogs behind the carpet.
Losing power means, at best, losing the property they acquired, but more likely losing freedom. So they are fighting for their survival. Staying in Kremlin is the only guarantee, the only immunity against imminent prosecution, because what they committed staying there, the way they acquired this multi-billion-dollar fortune, will be inevitably investigated.
I think as brilliant as he is, he may not even need to change the constitution to get what he wants. KGB mind, as simple as it is, it's also very devious. And it devious to the point that probably normal minds cannot comprehend or predict. So this would be my amendment. Even if he doesn't change it, there are certain things in store.
So the day you would finalize your movie, the things can change dramatically. And the main forecast for Russia is unpredictability, because Russia is in transition, is a very unstable authoritarian system, and everything can happen.
Anything is indeed possible in Russia, but unpredictability never goes beyond these stairs. Within the secrecy of the Kremlin walls, the leader and his cabal control the state, the economy, and the destiny of the people. Vladimir Putin has succeeded in his mission. He has established the vertical of power, stabilized the economy, and made Russia an important player on the world stage again. The former KGB is more powerful than ever before in history. But what choice do the Russian people really have? Whatever Putin's regime be called, dictocracy or militocracy, his chosen successor will continue to perpetrate his system, privatizing the state with former members of the KGB, ignoring the rule of law, and curbing freedom of thought. As for Russia's economic and diplomatic confrontation with the United States, its impact on the redivision of the world will concern not only the Russian people, but also the future of us all.